Manhunt ends. After 48 days at a cost of $10 million, a suspected cop killer faces justice. Key voting bloc. Millennials born after 1981 could determine who wins high-stake midterm elections. Cold quarters. Refugee camps in the Middle East bracing for the bitter winter ahead. And faithful departed. Ahead of the feasts of All Saints and All Souls, we visit an ancient Christian burial site. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for All Hallows Eve, Friday, October 31st, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. In Northeast Pennsylvania, people are finally breathing easier tonight. After a nearly 7-week manhunt, a suspected cop killer is locked up tonight facing first-degree murder charges. Wyatt Goolsby joining us now with the very latest.
Brian, the capture of 31-year-old Eric Matthew Frein is especially a relief to parents with young children in the area. One Pennsylvania town was worried about trick-or-treating in light of a statewide manhunt. Now they can rest easier knowing the lone suspect has been captured.
Coward! You lowlife!
As angry spectators shouted, Eric Frein remained stone-faced, led by state police into his first court appearance where he was arraigned on murder charges. U.S. Marshals caught Frein near an abandoned airplane hangar late last night. He surrendered without a fight.
I've characterized his actions in the past as pure evil, and I would stand by that.
Frein is accused of ambushing 2 state troopers on September 12th outside a state police barracks in Blooming Grove. One trooper, Corporal Brian Dixon, was killed and another injured before he escaped into the woods. After his capture, police put Dixon's handcuffs on Frein and drove him away in the slain officer's car. In total, police say the 48-day search cost about $10 million, using hundreds of officers to search through woods, caves, schools, and vacation homes. He is an experienced survivalist, and authorities say he was dedicated to killing law enforcement.
He had at least one sniper rifle that we knew of. We knew he had a handgun. We knew at the beginning that he had explosive charges with him.
Now that he is in custody, the Pike County District Attorney says they will seek the death penalty, offering his sympathies to the officers' families.
They will never be the same, but today we find some comfort as a community that we are taking these next steps towards justice.
Right now, Frein faces 2 capital offense charges, including murder in the first degree. Other charges against Frein include possession of a weapon of mass destruction. So, Brian, as you were saying earlier, a sigh of relief for a lot of the people in that area.
All right, thank you. Wyatt Goolsby reporting tonight. Midterms matter as we continue our EWTN News Nightly coverage of election 2014. Republicans could control both chambers of Congress after Tuesday's election. The House is safely Republican, and to take the Senate, the GOP needs 6 states now held by Democrats. Republican Senate candidates like Colorado's Cory Gardner and Dan Sullivan in Alaska are fighting hard right down to the wire. Election watchers say these few states could be decisive.
I'm looking at Iowa, Colorado, and maybe New Hampshire. If Democrats lose 2 out of those 3, the Senate's gone.
Some of the closest races, Louisiana and perhaps Georgia, may go to a runoff, and that means the makeup of the U.S. Senate may be unclear until early next year. So with so many key races still so close to call, the outcome of Tuesday's midterm elections could be determined by America's youngest voters. Chief White House correspondent Suzanne LaFranchi reports.
Millennials are anyone born after 1981 and make up 80 million voters, many of them Catholic. Political scientists describe them as connected and confident, but also deeply conflicted.
Just like they drain the economy,
Unlike Congress, the college Republicans and Democrats at the Catholic University of America socialize.
Governing takes place in the middle of both parties. And right now, the right is so far to the right and the left is so far to the left that nothing's getting done.
They focus too much on the party partisanship, focusing on those wedge issues instead of looking for the middle ground.
The students told me the issues motivating them this midterm are paying off student loans, the sluggish economy, and growing unemployment.
I think first with my brain and with my checkbook and my wallet, and I think about people who are going to be, making policies that work for me.
But faithful Catholic millennials struggle with often paradoxical competing social and economic issues.
the benefits of a merciful approach and the benefits of a doctrinally sound approach, and not knowing exactly how to reconcile those two.
Dr. Chad Pecknold believes many young Catholics will continue to struggle with the moral choices in the political arena.
Obviously, I was Catholic before I was Republican, and so that dictates a lot of how I vote.
I am pro-choice. I would never choose to have an abortion. If a friend came to me, I would tell them how I feel about the subject, but at the end of the day, it's none of my business what other women choose to do with their body.
In Pew's most recent poll, self-identified Catholic millennial conservatives make up 8% of registered voters. Moderates and liberal Catholics both at 11%, while Hispanic Catholic millennials represent the majority at 20%.
We're spending time in Kentucky.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do.
That's a close race.
You guys have all the help.
Pew also found millennials in general are the first in modern time to have higher levels of student loan debt, poverty, unemployment, less wealth, and personal income than their two immediate previous generations.
I'm hopeful that they're going to find a way of transcending our political divisions and finding a way towards the common good. Now, we've got a ways to go with them as a generation to see that happen, but every generation has something important to offer for the common good, and I'm convinced that the millennials do too.
Like their parents and grandparents, millennials have experienced economic crisis and war. Despite those struggles, political scientists say they continue to remain very optimistic about the future and may very well be part of the next greatest generation. Reporting from the White House, I'm Suzanne LaFranchi for EWTN News Nightly.
Thanks, Suzanne. Christopher Hale is Senior Fellow with Catholics in Alliance for the Common Good. He's co-founder of Millennial, a digital journal for young Catholics. So these millennials, we call them sometimes the JP2 generation. In your opinion, what makes millennial voters unique?
I think one of the first things you see about millennial voters is we are not nearly as ideological as the baby boomer generation. Even if you have Democrats or Republicans, they're not necessarily going to line up the party values on every issue. So we're much more open to a debate, to a conversation, and to new ways of thinking on the issues.
You're a millennial. What's most important to you this midterm election?
You know, I think really what I see at the heart of Catholic social teaching is a call to no to exclusion. No to exclusion to the child in the womb. No to exclusion for the immigrant coming into the country. So I think we're trying to create an inclusive society and a society where everyone's welcome. Everyone has a name, a face, and a future. I think that paradigm really goes over the totality of the issues for me.
So your Catholic faith guides you. Do you think it guides a lot of millennials or no?
It's hard to say. A lot of the Pew research tells us that there are religious values still in millennial voters, but it is decreasing. However, the values in a broad stroke of faith and politics does play a role. And so we see that play out in daily life. For me, my Catholic faith is the most important thing I bring to the table. And I think a lot of millennials still hold that true.
Well, so many of you grew up with John Paul II, and then, of course, Pope Benedict, and now we have Pope Francis. I wonder how he has affected your generation and whether that's going to affect the way millennial Catholics vote.
I think it's a big issue. Pope Francis says that Catholics are called to get caught up in political life. Catholics are called to meddle in politics. So
make a mess, he says.
Make a mess and be there. And I think he's really encouraging us to look beyond the traditional issues that divide us and really ask ourselves, how are our policies affecting those most disaffected, most marginalized? He doesn't even use the word margins anymore. He talks about total social exclusion. The idea that there are people and populations that are totally excluded from society, and politics should work first and primarily for them.
Do you think your generation is going to vote on Tuesday, or are there going to be those that say, well, this really doesn't matter?
Quite frankly, I do not think we'll see a high turnout of millennial voters in the election on Tuesday. The data tells us that's the reality. There's a lot of disaffection with what's going on in Washington, a lot of sense that though there's hope that we can do something, the people that are there right now are not the ones to do it. And quite frankly, the people that are running are not the ones to do it. We're looking for a whole new cast of candidates going forward. And a lot of times we think the issues are not necessarily left and right, but gray and young.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to see some of you running for those offices. Christopher Hale, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Well, next Tuesday, coming up, families fleeing the wrath of ISIS now face the prospect of living in refugee camps through winter. Thanks for joining us on Friday evening, the 31st of October. I'm Brian Patrick, and a nurse who treated Ebola patients and was quarantined in Maine is speaking out today after a judge lifts that quarantine. Casey Hickok says she's taking things minute by minute. She voiced hope she can travel overseas again. Hickox recently returned from Sierra Leone and has repeatedly defied Maine's quarantine for medical workers. Health officials want to restrict her movements, but a judge today says Hickox is not showing symptoms, so she's not infectious. Hickox has been ordered to continue daily monitoring and to coordinate her travel with state officials. U.S. consumer confidence reaches its highest level since the recession. The University of Michigan says its index of consumer sentiment rose to 86.9 in September. That's the highest since July 2007. U.S. consumers expect better economic growth and rising incomes in the incoming months. Dr. Maria Sophia Aguirre is economics professor at Catholic University of America, specializing in international economic development. There are signs that the economy is improving. People seem to be a lot more optimistic. How do you think our economy is faring at this point?
Well, I think that we have seen some progress. However, I am not as optimistic with the numbers that are showing employment going down, because we have to look at what are the reasons for that decrease in unemployment, right? There is misallocation of employment, there is underemployment, there's people who have left the labor force. But that being said, I think that as opposed to other parts of the world, the United States have the resources, the capacity of absorption, and the healthy structure that help us get out of the recession faster than other areas.
So there are reasons for optimism, but not to go overboard. Cautious optimism. Of course, you study the family's role in economics. What does the family have to do with the economy?
A lot.
Yes.
You know what the empirical evidence shows that is that the family is fundamental for the accumulation of wealth, of savings, of house ownership, which means dynamism within a society, mobility in society. We do has a lot to do with the production of human capital, of social capital, of moral capital, all very fundamental conditions for a healthy economy. Nobody invests in instability.
It makes a great deal of sense. Is it more relevant in certain parts of the world, though?
Well, actually, no. What I see in my data is no matter what the country you're talking about, in fact, the family structure is fundamental. If we are going to help poverty, and poverty of women, and more specifically on children, we should be taking more seriously the structure of the family. That's what the data shows all over the world. It's true that in socialized market economies, because of the size of the welfare benefits present, sometimes the broken families fare better, but that still does not solve all the other problems that come with a broken family, and never mind the capacity to finance such situations. So, no, my answer would be what the data is consistent, whether
all across the board.
Across the board.
And quickly, how can policymakers and business leaders really support the family, which would in turn support the economy?
Well, I think that it's not only policy, but it's also down to the ground business, right? How? Many ways. We need to be taking seriously what are the incentives in our tax structures. We need to be looking at education policies. Are parents more involved in that education process? We need to be looking at what are the hours of work? What are the leaves for maternity or parental leaves in general? What are the structures of work? Can we facilitate with the in technology that we have today more flexible location? And we can go down the list.
Yeah, much work to be done.
That's right.
And another point, we'll talk more specifically about that. Dr. Maria Sophia Aguirre, economics professor at Catholic University of America. Thanks for your insight tonight.
Thank you very much.
And weeks of U.S.-led coalition airstrikes have failed to break an ISIS siege as the terrorists continue shelling the Syrian border crossing to Turkey. The chaotic situation could top the agenda at a high-level meeting in Paris today. French President François Hollande is holding talks with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. They have a lot to talk about. Clearly, Turkey has a huge stake in what's happening in that region. France is also involved in the fight against ISIS as a member of the coalition that's launching airstrikes. The Islamic State's reign of terror has driven nearly 1.8 million people from their homes in Iraq. They're now facing the prospect of spending a harsh winter in refugee camps. Jason Calvi reports.
Living in homes without walls. and tents made of whatever they can find. These people fled the Islamic State.
A lot of people who were escaping ISIS, in fact, when they crossed the border into Kurdistan, were robbed of everything they might have been carrying with them, and some of them had to leave so quickly that they took nothing at all.
The Kurdistan Regional Government and the UN estimate 850,000 Iraqis have found refuge in Iraq's Kurdistan region this year. Daryl Grisgraber of Refugees International visited that area last month, and this week they put out a report on the needs of the people away from home in Kurdistan. One need is housing that can withstand winter, but another is convincing people to move into refugee camps.
A lot of people thought they would just get a tent made of plastic sheeting that would blow down in the wind, and so they just didn't want to be there. There are reinforced tents for winter, as you might imagine. Sometimes there are containers, caravans, that sort of thing.
The president of the Assyrian Aid Society Iraq says there's about 650 schools in his city of Duhok, with the classrooms now housing the displaced.
They are afraid that it's like impossible to return back to Mosul. It is our mission, our goal to create a place for them, a safe haven.
The Chaldean Catholic Archbishop of Erbil wants his flock to remain hopeful.
They have to rely on their faith that tomorrow would be brighter. When this tomorrow would come, it's in the hands of God. All we could do as bishops, priests, sisters, is to be with them.
The Chaldean Archbishop says people in the United States and elsewhere are making a difference by donating to those in need. And Brian, he thanks people around the world for praying for these persecuted Christians in Iraq.
All right, thank you, Jason. We'll continue those prayers. Up next, the tradition of remembering the dead is as old as Christianity itself. We visit the earliest Christian burial site beneath the Vatican. Be sure to set our clocks back 1 hour tomorrow night. Remember, spring forward, fall back. Daylight savings time ends at 2 a.m. Sunday. Of course, you could stay up and do it at 2 o'clock, but it's a lot easier just doing it before you go to bed. Thanks for joining us on this All Hallows Eve, or Halloween. I'm Brian Patrick. Esther Aguilera is president and CEO of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute, and the priorities of Hispanics seem to cross party lines. You've got immigration and the economy, for example. How do the campaigns of Hispanic candidates reflect this?
Well, first, as you know, the Hispanic population has been growing dramatically in the United States, so sometimes it helps to kind of know why not only is this vote and population important today, but why is it a growing importance? So 53 million Americans, 17% are Hispanic. But the growth trajectory, if you look at Americans under 18 years old, 25% of all Americans under 18 are Hispanic. So that is our future.
You can see where that's going, yes.
You see where it's going. That's our future. And also the growing segment is now more native-born. So the Hispanic population is growing. Before, it used to be a lot of immigration influx. It still is a big factor. But today, it's more native-born Americans. And of those, Hispanics 18 and younger, 90% were born here. So we're not talking about,
They're
some
truly
others.
Americans.
They're Americans,
Yes.
and they're not others. Sometimes the Hispanic population is misrepresented or misunderstood as everyone's, crossing the border.
I'd like to look at some interesting numbers very quickly from the Pew Research Center.
Yes.
The latest numbers show that support for congressional Democrats from registered Latino voters is down from 65% in 2010, 57% now. There's still obviously a majority, but why do you think those numbers are declining?
Right. Well, this is what's important to know about this community is that there is a significant segment that's always been a swing vote and up for grabs. The Hispanic, it's the same study, if you asked Hispanics back in the year 2002 what party they leaned or affiliated more with, it was 56% Democrat, 25% Republican. It went up in 2008 and actually 2012 to 70% Democrat and 20% Republican. And so, what Hispanics care about are issues, and certainly it's not a demographic that is going to stay solid the same way, and so you can't take it for granted. And you have to speak to the issues that are important to this
The
community.
issue of immigration would seem to be important, is it?
It is important. Immigration is one of those issues that gets to the heart of the community, but there's when we look at the polling of what Hispanics care about, it is also jobs and the economy, healthcare, and education. So, in fact, some of these issues poll higher than immigration, but immigration is one of those issues where they know where candidates are, if the candidates are with them or not.
Well, the candidates, I think, are very clearly aware that they need this vote to be elected, so it'll be interesting to see how that pans out on Tuesday. Esther Aguilera, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Sure. Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Brian.
And next Tuesday, EWTN News Nightly brings you special live Midterms Matters election 2014 coverage. After our regular 6 p.m. Eastern newscast, we track returns as they come in live. Starting at 9 Eastern, we'll have expert analysis of key races and discuss the issues important to you. Midterms Matter, special coverage, election night, live right here on EWTN. Well, a recent online video seen by millions is bringing attention to catcalling and street harassment of women.
Hey, what's up, girl? How you doing?
The video was shot over 10 hours in Manhattan. A hidden camera records comments made to a young woman as she walks New York City streets. It was created by an anti-street harassment group to spark discussion on unsolicited comments directed towards women. We're joined tonight by Skype by Sabrina Schaefer, the executive director of the Independent Women's Forum. Sabrina, millions of people have seen this video. Were you surprised by it at all?
Well, look, I was surprised by how disingenuous it is. It's an attempt to show how often women are harassed on the street and how we are living within a culture of sexism. I think that's sort of an unfair statement about what life in America is really like for women. I don't want to underplay the fact that there are bad people out there, and women sometimes do have to put up with some catcalling and whistling, and that can be unpleasant. But I think we want to keep it into perspective.
So what is the deeper issue here as far as you're concerned?
Well, this is yet another group that has popped up to sort of perpetuate this myth that life in America is inherently hostile toward women, that women are persistently discriminated against, that we are constantly living under fear of men harassing and being violent towards us. I think it's a terrible message to send not only to women and girls, but also to men. It perpetuates this myth that men are always the aggressors, always the perpetrators, and women are always the victims.
There was a day when men were chivalrous, but you say if you want sameness, don't expect chivalry. Explain that.
Right. Well, look, so many good things came out of the feminist movement, and I like to be careful not to be too critical of it. So much of the life that I enjoy today is a result of all of that hard work that women before me fought for. But the reality is that chivalry, while it may have been imperfect, had a purpose, and a lot of it was there to kind of restrain this kind of bad behavior from men, to make sure that women were treated properly. And so when we tell women that they're just like one of the guys, suddenly we've lost a lot of that culture and those social mores that were so important. So while feminism brought us a lot of good things, there were some trade-offs along the way as well.
Let's face it, though, there is a lot of harassment of women. How can we combat that culture?
Well, look, I think it's important that if you see this happen, somebody, stops it. Someone says, hey, that's not appropriate. You speak up. Of course, it can be uncomfortable for a woman who's walking down the street. But again, I don't feel that when I walk to the grocery store, if I drop my kids off at school, or if I walk through an office building, this is not really happening. It's happening in certain kinds of neighborhoods. It's happening where places are highly populated, like in the middle of Times Square, like the video showed. I think we want to keep it in perspective.
All right, Executive Director of the Independent Women's Forum, Sabrina Schaefer, thanks so much for your perspective tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And we celebrate the Feasts of All Saints and All Souls this weekend, but remembering the faithful departed is an everyday event at the Vatican. Alan Holdren has more from Rome.
Before becoming the center of the Catholic Church, what's now the Vatican was actually a cemetery. It's been a burial site for Christians since the 1st century.
Here was the circus of Nero and Caligula. They were killed here. Peter was killed here, he was crucified here, he was buried over there. That's the reason we have St. Peter's Basilica built over his tomb.
The necropolis, as it's called, was excavated in the 1930s and 40s. Today it's open to the public.
One of the beautiful things is you get to see a site that was really well preserved because it was all buried under dirt. And so that makes it even more exclusive to go and see because the houses of the dead are well preserved and also the frescoes.
The Catholic Church venerates the dead, remembering saints like Peter as examples of holiness and intercessors to God. On the November the 2nd Feast of All Souls, Pope Francis himself will go down to St. Peter's tomb to pray, just as he did last year. But there are other burial sites within the Vatican walls.
At the Vatican's German college is this place, the Campo Santo, or the Holy Field. Here, the dead are such a part of everyday life that you have to be careful not to step on their graves.
Charlemagne himself set this spot aside as the German pilgrim house in Rome at the end of the 8th century. As pilgrims died, they were buried here. Now, just 2 or 3 people each year have that honor. And so the Vatican area continues to serve its original purpose as a cemetery. In Rome, Alan Holdren, EWTN News Nightly.
All right, thank you, Alan, for those wonderful reminders. And until Monday, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch us again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend celebrating All Saints and All Souls. Set your clocks back. Good night, and may God bless you.